Well, let's look into this a little deeper, and I'd like to share some new research with you that's coming out. With just the last few months, researchers are lending us new clues and new evidence into what this information means. For example, I've put a box around the amino acid of leucine. So leucine is defined as UUA. That's a leucine, and that's fine. But look at this. UUG is a completely different chemical combination, and it's still leucine. And CUU is still leucine, CUC, CUA, CUG. Why is it that all of these don't result in separate, individual, and different patterns? Why do they all code for exactly the same amino acid of leucine? Why are they so generalized? That's the mystery in the life sciences today. Well, researchers have been able to show us, and this is a pretty amazing thing to say. The mystery has always been, when we look at genetic codes, when we see those amino acids lined up on the double helix, what is it that determines whether the amino acids, whether the antennae are turned off or on? Well, within just recent years, through the HeartMath Institute, people like Dan Winter working with HeartMath, what has been discovered is this, is that there is a switch that turns off and turns on where those coding sites lie, and that the switch for that turning off and turning on is what we call emotion. And this is the first time that we've ever seen the patterns of emotion directly physically linked to human genetic material. So what I'm saying is this. When you look at the double helix, the green is the double helix of the DNA on this image. What Dan Winter says is the long wave of emotion programs this shorter wave of DNA. So emotion, the long wave, the long red wave of emotion, wherever this wave of emotion touches, where it crosses this double helix, is what determines where the site is that code will either be turned off or turned on. If we're going to have an antenna at this site, it will only be turned on if the wave of emotion crosses this, this double helix. Well, this is really interesting for us because two things. First of all, the waves of emotion, researchers have determined that you and I are primarily capable of only two emotions. Many derivatives of those emotions, and two primary emotions, fear and love. Fear and love. Well, fear is a long, slow wave of emotion. So this wave of fear is a long, slow wave and touches relatively few sites on this DNA. So an individual living in fear is limited to the number of antennae that they have available to them, whereas an individual living in the pattern of love, this is love in DNA. You can see it's a higher frequency, shorter wavelength. We have many more potential sites for coding along that genetic pattern. This information, this is amazing. This is the first time we've ever had a hard digital link between emotion and genetics. And what we're saying is this, that the way you interpret and perceive emotion in your lives directly, linearly affects and determines how your body responds genetically. In compassion, in love, you have the opportunity, and it is an opportunity, to encode many more genetic patterns within your body. When you live in fear, when you live in depression, it's not wrong and it's not bad. Please do not hear that. What fear and depression allow you to do is to have the opportunity of the consequence of fewer numbers of those codes that are turned on, and they're changeable. You have the opportunity through your life to determine which of these codes you're actually using. This pattern, this particular image, this is some research that was done through the HeartMath Institute, and a brilliant work by a gentleman named Vladimir Popanov, a Russian researcher. And what he determined was this. They took human DNA tissue, placed it into a vacuum tube, and measured the photons in that tube. Well, actually, they measured the photons just before the tissue went into that tube. And what they found was that the photons were scattered. Let me show you this on a drawing. What they found was that the photons were scattered in this vacuum tube. So here's the tube. Here are random photons. And they said, okay, that's fine. That's what we would expect. Into this vacuum tube now, they placed human DNA, human tissue. I'm not sure where the tissue came from or what it was. So let's put a little double helix in there. And then they measured the photons again, and what they found astounded the researchers. It astounds me to this day. What they found was that the patterns of light aligned themselves. Let's make light red. The patterns of light aligned themselves along the axis of the DNA. That's what I'm showing here. So I'm showing right here on this slide. The patterns of light align themselves along the axis of this DNA. What they can say is, what we can say from this, is that DNA entrains light. Now the really interesting thing was when they took the DNA out of the vacuum, the light was still entrained in that pattern, even though the DNA wasn't there. And the researchers call this now the phantom DNA effect. And what they are saying, what we can say very accurately, is that light responds to our genetic material. And in that, with that piece of information now, for the first time, what we have is a link between emotion, DNA, and light, which is what our world is made out of. As emotion, thoughts, love, fear, whatever they are, as emotion determines the patterns and the codes in the DNA, and the DNA determines the patterns of light. DNA serves as a template for the patterns of light around us. For the first time, we have hard, physical, direct evidence, digital evidence, that our emotions and our thoughts directly affect the physical world around us. And that is an amazing thing for me to be able to say to you. Not only does it affect the world around us, it affects the world within us. The energetic systems of the body, the nervous systems, the nervous pathways, and the chakras are all determined through our experience of emotion and feeling, how emotion and feeling trip the switches of genetic material and our body resulting as an expression of that. Okay, so let's review a little bit. Let's see what we've got here. We've just covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. What you're seeing here, this is an image, a schematic, of an electromagnetic experience. The blue that you're seeing here, this is the electrical portion. This is thought and emotion. And offset by 90 degrees from this thought, trailing behind, if this were three-dimensional, this would be coming out toward you and going back into the screen. The red are the magnetic fields that we are accustomed to in our world. So historically, whenever we've had a thought or a feeling or an emotion, the lag time between the time that that thought is generated and when it comes to fruition is the result of these dense magnetic fields. Think of the magnetic fields as the glue, as the muck, sticky stuff that prevents these thoughts from manifesting instantly. When you have a fantasy, why doesn't your fantasy come true immediately? And think how confusing your world would be if it did. Well, it's because these magnetic fields prevent that from happening. Well, look what's happening in our world right now. You and I are living a time of decreased magnetics, many fewer magnetics. There's no glue, there's no muck, no sticky stuff left to prevent these thoughts from manifesting quickly. What's actually happening, and this is the beauty of this process, when you go to the sacred sites throughout the world, many sacred sites, what we're seeing, now we're able to bring much of this information all together now and synthesize this into the patterns that are allowing our life to unfold as they're unfolding. What we're seeing is this, that in many of the sacred sites throughout the world, the chambers that were the sacred sites, those chambers built 1,000 years ago, maybe in Chaco Canyon, 5,000 years ago, some cases 11 and 13,000 years ago, those chambers simulated then what you and I are living right now. You go to the board and show you this.